Everybody in Silicon Valley has worked next to somebody that has gone off, started their own thing, and done well. And you know that person personally, and you say, hey, he wasn't that smart. Maybe I can do it too. But I drove into the parking lot of Atari, and it was full of cars. And I thought, these are all the cars of employees that are paying for these cars with the salaries that I'm paying them. We were selling games at that time for about $2,000. But in their lifetime, they'd make $30,000 to $50,000 in coin drop. So it didn't take rocket science to say I was on the wrong side of that equation. Steve wanted to work for Atari because he wanted to be in the coolest company in the Bay Area. And he turned out to be a great employee. For me, he pissed a lot of my people off here and there.
Nolan Bushnell was the founder of the legendary Atari, which started the video game revolution, creating a multi-billion-dollar industry. Known as the father of the video game industry, Nolan has been inducted into the Video Game Hall of Fame and the Consumer Electronics Association Hall of Fame. Over the past 50 years, he has been involved in a significant number of ventures, from a restaurant chain, Chuck E. Cheese, to a tech combinator that grandfathered Google Maps and Pixar's technologies, to educational companies. He recently published his second book, Shaping the Future of Education, where he discusses the need to leverage technology and video games to replace the outdated form of education. In this interview, we spoke about Atari's first blockbuster, Pong, his employee, Steve Jobs, his adventures with Chuck E. Cheese, and his remarkable life. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe. And now we start. Mr. Bushnell, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. It's always fun to chat, and the new media is podcasting, and when you look at guys like Joe Rogan and what have you, they have viewerships greater than NBC, ABC, and all put together. So it's a new world.
I'm just as popular as John Rogan. So
excellent.
I've read that Paramount Pictures was planning to shoot a movie about your life, and Leonardo DiCaprio was supposed to play you. Is it true?
It was true, and then Hollywood grinds slowly in certain cases and fast others. And so it's still in the works, not with Leonardo, but with another group. And I don't know if it's going to happen or not. 10 years ago, I said, yeah, probably next year. Today, I'm saying, yeah, probably next year.
That's pretty cool. On Instagram, there are a few profiles of Nolan Bushnell, and some people probably impersonate you, but I found one, and the description there says, I gave birth to your son's video game addiction and also to irrational fear of mice costumes. Is it fair?
Probably fair.
For people who don't know, why is that?
I basically created the first commercial video game called Computer Space. And there were video games on big computers before, but I was the first one that created it at a price that could work for coin-operated games.
Tell me, how did things with Atari started? What's the story behind it?
I played a game on the big computers called Space War.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike any other engineer at the time, I had put myself through college working as manager of a games department at an amusement park, Lagoon, just outside of Salt Lake City. And so I knew the economics of the coin-operated game business, but, take $1 million computer and 25 cents for 3 minutes, and the math didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I variously described my life as a series of happy accidents, and that I got the job at the amusement park for all the wrong reasons. I actually had a successful advertising company, and I got the job at the amusement park just to keep me from spending money during the summer, because I was saving up to put myself through college. So I would sell advertising during the day and work at the amusement park at nights. That kept me from spending money on dates and girlfriends and what have you during the summer. When I moved to California, I went to work for Ampex, and it was in the video file business. And I sharpened my skills for video design and digital technology, but I didn't do it for that reason. I did it because they offered me the most money. So it was, but it was a fortuitous, happy accident. And so when computers dropped in price, all of a sudden I thought, hey, maybe I can do this. And it was, and I did. So it was kind of the right time at the right place with the technology that was just good enough.
Is it when Computer Space was born?
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about Computer Space.
Computer Space was my attempt to create the game of Space War, but in the coin-operated version. And the game of Space War was on every PDP-1 and later on the PDP-11. That was Digital Equipment's mini computer at the time. What that did really was it informed how video games could play. And the second happy accident is that I licensed it to a company in Mountain View, Silicon Valley, that was in the coin-operated game business. And they were basically kind of a bunch of buffoons. They didn't, And so one of the characteristics of Silicon Valley is that everybody in Silicon Valley has worked next to somebody that has gone off, started their own thing and done well. And you know that person personally, and you say, hey, he wasn't that smart. Maybe I can do it too. So it's a way of kind of giving positive feedback to the potential. And that's what happened there. And so I knew I couldn't hitch my star to those guys. And so I left with the idea that we were going to be the engineering facility for other companies. We had no money. We had no manufacturing. All we had was an understanding of the technology. And so I got 2 contracts, one from Nutting, the company that I previously worked with, another one from Bally. They agreed to pay me X amount a month. And I don't actually remember the amount. Seems like it was $20,000 a month, but it was enough that we could rent a place, hire a couple of engineers, and fulfill the contracts. And the next happy accident was that the first day that we hired Al Alcorn, I had just visited a demonstration of the Magnavox Odyssey, and it had kind of a ping pong game. But when I went up and saw it, I thought this kind of a piece of crap. It wasn't very sophisticated, had no sound, had no score. It was just some blobs on the screen. But people were kind of having fun with it. And that was the first day Al Alcorn showed up, and I felt that I needed a training project for him because Computer Space was pretty complex. I assigned him to do a ping pong game, and he had it coded up, built with breadboard in a week, and it was pretty fun. And then we made some changes, and it got more fun, and some more changes, and it got more fun. And I thought for myself, hey, maybe I can use this to fulfill my contract with Bally. So I took instance back to Bally, and they weren't sure because it was a 2-player game. And up to that point, there had never been a 2-player game that didn't have a 1-player game that had been successful. And so they passed on it. And then while I was in Chicago doing that presentation, the guys had put one on location to see how much it had earned. And it had earned so much, Coinbox totally filled up. And so it was earning so much money. And I said, maybe we can build these things. And so I figured out on the airplane flying back that we had enough money to build 12, actually 13, but I didn't want to do 13. I thought I'd do 12. And we built them, sold them immediately. Then we did 24, then we did 48, then we did, 100. And then we got so we could building 100 a day. And that was the foundation of Atari.
So for people who didn't get it yet, you're talking about Pong game, right? Which is legendary. And it's funny that it took just a week to create it.
It was a week plus the tweaks.
Mm-hmm.
So it was probably a month by the time we got it to a saleable point. Ted Dabney and I each put in $250. That was our seed capital. And then we had royalties coming in from Computer Space, from Nutty. So that was a little bit of cash flow. And then the 2 contracts, that was more cash flow. This will sound funny, but venture capital hadn't been invented yet. I never even heard that till probably 2 years later. We never had any money. We were growing as fast as we could support it from the cash flow, but it was good enough. And we knew that we understood the technology better. And slowly but surely, we were able to get a factory and processes and accounts receivable and accounts payable and purchasing and all that. And we built the company, from scratch, really not knowing what we were doing, just making it up as we go along.
When did you realize that you've created something phenomenal, something that's creating the full industry?
There was a funny time that I drove into the parking lot of Atari, and it was full of cars. And I thought, these are all the cars of employees that are paying for these cars with the salaries that I'm paying them. And I know that sounds like a funny epiphany, but it was one of those things that I thought, there's some scale here that I never anticipated.
Looking back 50 years, right? Because Atari turned 50, I think, last year.
Yeah.
Are you surprised how far game industry went?
Yes and no. I knew that the technology was going to move towards photorealism, and we're pretty much there now. What I didn't expect was the cell phone, the carrying a game player in your pocket all the time. Somehow that just didn't dawn on me, that we could have so much power in our pocket.
And one of the person who's responsible for that used to work for you, Steve
That's
Jobs.
right. He did. And
so what's the story there?
If you build a good company, good people will seek you out because they want to be next to the important. One of the reasons I came to California was I knew that Silicon Valley was where technology was happening. And so as an electrical engineer, I wanted to be on the right hand of the throne, And so Steve wanted to work for Atari because he wanted to be in the coolest company in the Bay Area. And he turned out to be a great employee. For me, he pissed a lot of my people off here and there. But I think that he always had a spark, and I am not surprised that he did some great stuff.
I've read that you realized that he has this smart friend, Steve Wozniak, and you were able to almost employ them for the price of one. What's the story behind that?
Two Steve for the price of one. Yeah, that's true. I did that by putting Steve on the engineering night shift, which he was the only member of. But I knew Woz would be there, and so I knew that Woz, who was a very, very savvy engineer, I mean, much, much better than Steve, better than me, was thinking they did Breakout for me, which was a huge success.
Well, like your first hit was Pong, right? What was the second one? Was Tank one of them, or?
No, the next one was a thing called Space Race, and we did Gotcha, then we did Pong Doubles, and we did Quadra Pong.
Isn't Space Race similar to Computer Space a little bit?
Not really. It was a very, very simple game of, we had 2 asteroid fields, and you had to maneuver. It was a 2-player game, or 1 player, and you had to make it to the top to get a point without getting collided with one of the asteroids.
Besides Steve's, the founders of Activision also used to work for you.
That's correct.
Do you remember any stories related to them?
They were very, very good people. And after I sold it, the Warners treated Atari under me, engineers were the gods. They were where all the magic was. And so I tried to always give them a little piece of the action and what have you. And then Warner didn't. And so the guys decided, hey, let's do it our own. And so Whitehead and those guys, they just went off and created really nice companies. You know, without saying too many bad things, Atari was massively mismanaged after I sold it by Warner. They had success, but it was really because the product was so good, but the strategies they had was just really sucky. And it kind of came to roost with the crash of 83.
I've read, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that the new CEO, he was too much marketing focused or not enough R&D focused.
Not just that, the company became peopled with record people.
Mm-hmm.
And so their whole focus was on cartridges, not record players. And they didn't realize that the technology had to move, of the record players had to, the game consoles had to move forward. For example, the day that we launched the 2600,
mm-hmm.
it was already obsolete.
Ooh, elaborate on that.
The reason was that RAM memory was very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And so to hit the price point, the 2600 only had 128 bytes, not kilobytes, 128 bytes of memory. By the time we launched it, the price of memory had dropped by 2 orders of magnitude. So we could have had 10,000 bytes of memory for the same price.
Wow.
Easy, simple, fixed, and it would have made the games, the 2600 had 1/4-inch pixels. Getting a little more memory, all of a sudden we'd have had pixels that had been pixels and color, and you just have it would have given you the same resolution that the Nintendo Famicom had.
It's interesting to me because one of the reasons, at least from my research, why you sold the company was because you realized that in order to scale it, you need a lot of capital to invest in these consoles, right? So basically, Warner Communications should have just followed the scenario that you laid out for them. Like, hey, here's the console, you need to focus on that. They didn't do it, did they?
They didn't. And I don't think a example ever in which the dominant player in an industry abandoned that industry. But that's what Warner did. I mean, Atari essentially went away in 90, and then it came back a little bit under the Tramiels, but it was a ghost of a shell at that time.
It sounds like it still exists. In fact, I think they call you back to be on the board for some time, right? In 2010 or something. What is Atari now?
Atari is being run by a guy named Wade Rosen, smart guy. It's actually in pretty good hands right now.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're doing is they are taking the brand, and while being respectful for the legacy, they're trying to push it forward. And they've got several new things coming and games and they're trying to be more creative. And I think they're going to be able to do a good job of it.
You've been involved in a lot of ventures, and we're going to cover a few of them. But before we go there, I want to actually wind the clock back to, I think, 1943 and chat with you a little bit about your childhood to understand who Nolan Bushnell is. So where were you born and grew up?
Born in a town called Clearfield, Utah, which was about halfway between Salt Lake and Ogden on Flint. We were surrounded by what I'd call a rich environment of, let's put it, there were a lot of World War II and Korean War defense airplanes that were being scrapped. And so there were these, there were 4 or 5 scrap yards of airplane bodies, and they were going to be melted down for the aluminum, but they still had wire and sometimes radios and even microphones. And as kids, we'd go into these, sneak in there sometimes at night and take all the good electronic stuff out of them. So it was kind of fun. And if you were a geek in the 50s, ham radio was the big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to give homage to my 3rd grade teacher. For science, she had this magic science box in the closet. And once a week, she'd take it out and assign one kid to perform the experiments that it had. And she chose me to do the one on electricity. And so I went back with the dry cells and the little motors and the little lights and what have you, and I wired them up and got them all working. And I was hooked. That night, I put a card table up in the corner of my bedroom and got every piece of wire and old light switch and flashlight and started to tinker, and I never looked back, never quit. Still tinker to this day.
I could tell, yeah. I guess at that time you start leaning towards engineering. Maybe it was the first
absolutely. That one day, instead of wanting to be a fireman, I wanted to be an electrical engineer.
What did your parents do?
My dad owned a construction company. He was a cement contractor, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she had previously been an elementary school teacher.
Did you have any siblings?
I have 3 sisters.
And which one of you was the troublemaker?
I was always the troublemaker.
Has anyone besides you become an engineer, or just you?
Just me.
If I went to school with you, how would I describe Nolan?
I was a bit of a troublemaker. I mean, I think my senior yearbook, they gave me the title of biggest playboy. I dated a lot of girls and had a lot of fun that way. But I always had one foot in technology. For example, I had a speakerphone before they had been invented by AT&T. And I hooked up a telephone so that all of a sudden I could run it through an amplifier and a speaker. And so guys would come over, they'd call up somebody's girlfriend and they'd talk, not knowing that everybody was listening. Stuff like that.
That was cold. What's your favorite childhood memory?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I had so many of them. One of the things I was very proud of is when I got my ham radio license. I was 10 years old. And I think in some ways that was kind of important because I was talking to people on the air and they didn't want to talk to some kid. So I sort of faked being an adult. But I think that was kind of fun.
And at some point, you graduated high school and you went to study engineering in University of Utah? Or Utah State first, I think.
I started out at Utah State and then I transferred to the University of Utah.
Why did you transfer?
Because I was partying too much. And when I transferred down to the university, I said, I'm only going to hang out with people that are getting straight A's.
Did you?
If you're hanging out with people that are getting straight A's, then they give you the discipline that, if you're living in the fraternity house, which I was at Utah State, people were always saying, hey, come on, it's Tuesday night, let's go have a beer. And that's pretty hard to do, and an engineering homework at the same time. So I thought I'd just get rid of all the bad temptations. I found that sometimes that those global decisions are smart. Like when I went to work for the amusement park, take myself out of harm's way, augment your personal resolve.
I've read that you lost your father fairly early and you had to start helping your family.
Correct.
When did you realize that you're adult now and you have to take care of other people?
15.
Oh.
That was when my dad died. And so I knew that I had to put myself through college, that I had to help the family. And I was making quite a bit of money because I had a TV repair business at the time. And TV repair business at that time was pretty lucrative if you had a good reputation.
I heard the story where you were charging a lot for the replacement part, way more that it's actually cost like 10 times or something like that. Is it fair?
Because I was able to buy the tubes very cheaply. But in order to get a lot of customers, the typical, door-to-door fee was $5, and I charged 50 cents. I was, cleaning up because I had a little bit of a problem because I was so young that people didn't think that I was going to be any good, but they said, well, for 50 cents, there's nothing to lose. but I would mark the tubes up. So generally, I'd make somewhere between $15 and $20 in markup of the tubes I'd replace.
You had this entrepreneurial spirit from very early age. It's pretty impressive.
I learned early on that if you worked for yourself and were willing to do a little bit of marketing, that you could make a lot more than, minimum wage at the time was $1 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty easy to beat that one.
What was your first job after graduation from the school?
Went to work for Ampex in Silicon Valley.
And we already discussed it. So it was Ampex and Syzygy, right? Which you turned into the Atari.
Yeah, correct.
We discussed Atari. So after Atari, you left Atari, and it's
Chuck E. Cheese.
Chuck E. Cheese. Tell us about Chuck E. Cheese.
Well, Chuck E. Cheese actually started inside Atari. And my idea was I wanted to vertically integrate towards the market. We were selling games at that time for about $2,000, but in their lifetime, they'd make $30,000 to $50,000 in coin drop. So it didn't take rocket science to say I was on the wrong side of that equation. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to, there was a lot of competition for mall arcades and bowling alleys and things like that. So I didn't want to compete with them. So I needed to build my own thing, my own place. And so that's where Chuck E. Cheese came out. And that was a kind of a mashup between the most successful pizza parlor in the area was a thing called Pizza and Pipes. Mm-hmm. They had a Wurlitzer theater organ that had been deconstructed, and the pipes and everything were all over the walls. And the place was packed whenever they'd had an organist to play it, because, the drums would beat, and, all that. It was not only could you hear it, but you could see all the things that was happening. They even put little lights on the pipes so that you could see which pipe was being pushed. And so I thought, okay, that's the most successful, but I don't want to have to replicate finding an old theater organ. So at about the same time, I went to Disneyland and saw the Tiki Room. And I said, okay, my engineers can do that. And so I decided we'd do animals and things that we could animate, and that would be our theater, if you would. And that would be the show, and that would be the draw. And then we'd have a big arcade, and we'd choose pizza because there was a wait time for pizza. Mm-hmm. And it worked.
There was wait time, and when they can play arcade.
Exactly.
That's smart. Look at you.
We did another tricky thing. We basically surveyed what a large pizza costs by our competitors. And, there's a lot of little pizza shops around. We'd take that and we'd increase it by about $2. So we'd be $2 higher than anybody else. But we would give them at a quarter piece, we'd give them $3 worth of tokens. So it looked like we were cheaper, but the tokens cost us nothing.
Yeah.
And it got people started playing in the games.
Interesting. Wow. That's very neat. And why was it, Chuck E. Cheese, the main mascot is a rat, right?
Yeah.
Was it always the idea?
No, the code name was actually Coyote Pizza. And when I bought the costume, I actually thought it was a coyote. Because I knew my engineers could make it move. We didn't have any sculptors. And so it was a walk-around costume that I bought at an amusement park convention.
How did you find out that it's not coyote?
When I called up the engineer and said, how's the coyote coming? He says, it's not a coyote, it's a rat.
So
Rick Rat's Pizza. And of course, the marketing guys said, no, you can't call a restaurant a rat. So I said, well, okay, we'll name it something else, but we'll keep him as a rat. We'll just de-emphasize his ratness.
One of the things that I don't hear a lot of credit given to you is way before Y Combinator was born, there was something called Catalyst Technology, which
Correct.
You started. Tell me about Catalyst Technology, because that's fascinating what you've done there.
I had a lot of little projects in Atari, and Warner basically closed them down. And I realized that putting them all under one roof didn't make economic sense. So I thought, I want to start some of these things that I know are going to be successful. How can I do it efficiently? And so it was really, I wanted to provide accounting, back office control, because in the first year of a startup, you really can't afford to have your own marketing department, your own accounting department, what have you. I wanted them to work on the product, get it working as seamlessly as possible. So the idea was you'd fund them with a key, they'd have an office. And so we had one big building that had a bunch of different offices. And we had an accounting department that kept the books for everybody. And the payroll was set up and bank accounts. And so all they had to do is sign their name 6 times and they were in business.
So all of these ideas that were generated there, it's actually your ideas. It's not like the founders who came to you asking for money.
It was both. We had some people coming, but I'd say half of them were probably my ideas.
Let's talk about a few of those. ETAK Navigator.
Yeah, that was basically automobile navigation. So if you're on Google Maps right now, it's all based on my tech. And later on, we did one called By Video, which should have turned into Amazon, but it didn't. But it was basically online shopping. Before online was the deal, we used laser discs, and it did pretty well. We ended up selling that. That was a good exit. I had another one that was called Magnum Microwave, which was for hopping streets when the internet was really starting, before we had fiber. I did another one that was called Iro, which was a cosmetics company, believe it or not. This was one that was brought to me by somebody else. And I realized that I never wanted to get into a business that was selling to women, because I really didn't understand it.
Kadabrascope.
That was fun too. That was part of Chuck E. Cheese. That was tweening. That was when computers were just starting to get involved in animation, but it was too soon. Like it took us probably 24 hours to render a single frame. The computers were just too slow. I'm actually a little bit responsible for Steve Jobs buying Pixar, because I had given him a demonstration of Kadabrascope, oh boy, probably 2 years before he was offered Pixar. And when he was thinking about buying Pixar, he came back and he says, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "Well, if you can render a frame in less than an hour, do it. If you can't, don't." And he looked at me and he said, "I've invented a render farm." I didn't know what that was. It was basically where you divide the thing. Instead of having one computer, you basically have 100 or 100 processors working in parallel. And it turns out that rendering a frame of video is something that is very easy to make distributed. You just split the picture up into a bunch of little pieces, and then it renders it.
And how long did it take them to render?
They got it down to 15, 20 seconds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. There's a story that he actually, at some point, he offered you a third of Apple for 50 grand. Is it true?
That's true.
I checked the price of Apple, so company worth 2.7 trillion as of yesterday.
Yeah, right. I turned him down because he wasn't ready.
Yeah.
I think, to be a CEO. And I think that it might have been bad if I had, because I didn't have the time to train him. But Mike Markle, who made the investment instead of me, turned out to be the first president of Apple and really was Steve's mentor.
So you've been involved in so many different ventures, and I've read that there are like more than 20. And you also have a quite big family. Is it 8 kids?
I have 8 children now.
How do you find time for either family or your ventures?
There is a value to quantity, but there's also a value to quality. And so I tried to be a good father by having quality time with my kids. Every Sunday morning, I'd roust one of the kids out of bed and take them to breakfast at some crazy place. a breakfast place where old fishermen would be coming in from a catch, looking all gnarled and dusty or there. And I tried to make it so that it was at least a half hour away by car. And so that gave me a good chance to really catch up and talk with the kids and find out. And then after breakfast, I'd spoil them. We'd go somewhere and buy something or do some shopping or what have you. Then when they were 10, I would take them on a business trip with me overnight, domestically. When they were 12, I would take them to Europe. And when they were 14, I would take them to Asia on a business trip. And I just take them to all my business meetings. And I tell this story where my second son, Tyler, was with me in Tokyo. And in the cab going over to my first meeting, I was explaining to him what I wanted to accomplish in this meeting. And in breaking it down very simply for him, I realized that isn't what I wanted at all. And I totally changed my pitch by the time I got there, which saved me a whole bunch of money. So I said, not only was that a good idea, but it was very profitable.
If I ask your children what they've learned from you, what do you think they would say?
Well, I think that they would say they learned a lot about the game business because I used to take them to trade shows with me. I think they would say they learned a lot about business, that they learned a lot about profit and loss. Like I used to, if we were at a restaurant, I'd tell them, how much money do you think this restaurant is going to earn tonight? And they said, well, I don't know. I said, well, let's figure it out. And I'd say, what do you think the rent is here? How big is it? And finally we'd kind of work out a number. And so how much rent do we have to pay today? Well, it's almost $100 or $200. I said, how much do you think the food costs? Well, typical restaurant, it's about a third. How much labor? How many people are being here? You can see the waiters and the waitress and the hostess. How many people are in the kitchen? One of them would run over and look in the kitchen and count, and they'd come back. And I'd say, well, now, how much do you think they're making? And so we figured out how much labor they'd have. And then they'd come back and they'd say, well, this restaurant's only making about 10% of the sales. I'd say, how much is a typical person eating here? How much are they paying? Is this a good business? I said, well, let's figure it out. I'd say, okay, we're here on a Friday night, so it's going to be busier than normal, but 365 days and this amount. And all of a sudden, the guy who owns the restaurant's taking home $300,000 this year. That seems like a pretty good payday. I say, oh, yeah, but he's only making 10%. Yeah, but it's a pretty good payday. That kind of stuff.
I have a quick blitz for you. I'll ask you a quick question. You give me a quick answer. Who's your favorite musician?
The Who.
What's your favorite movie?
Princess Bride.
Your favorite video game?
Tempest.
Favorite country to visit?
It's somewhere between London, Ireland, Italy, and Japan. Maybe France.
And favorite food?
I think Korean.
What's the first item on your bucket list?
I've actually had a hard time with my bucket list because I've done most of the things I want to do.
Yeah.
I've not done India yet. A lot of travel, but I have not been to India. And I'm worried about that because I'm old enough that you don't want to get Steve Jobs went to India to his grew and came back with a blood disease, almost killed him.
Yeah.
And at my age, I don't, I'm not sure I want to deal with that risk. So maybe not. I like Australia a lot, and I haven't been to New Zealand. I think my next big thing is going to be New Zealand.
And last question for you. What life advice would you give to young people today?
Get a lot of jobs. Do a lot of different things, because you never know what your life direction is going to be. And the more tools you put in your intellectual tool belt, the more probable it is that you'll be successful. And always be the guy or girl in the room that works harder than anybody around you. Be passionate. Be curious. Be resourceful.